It started with silence. Not the peaceful kind that comes with a quiet morning, but the kind that makes you feel like something is wrong. On April 13, 2009, the staff of the Silver Pine Inn in Clearwater, Maryland followed their usual Monday routine. Breakfast buffet cleaned up, linens replaced, checkouts logged in the system. Room 1427 was due to check out at noon. By 2 p.m., the phone at the front desk was still ringing with no answer. When the housekeeper tried the door, her keycard light flashed red, locked from the inside. She knocked again, softly this time. Still nothing. Then came the faintest draft from beneath the door. The air smelled like cold metal and disinfectant. The manager arrived with the spare card. The latch clicked open. And in that instant, the illusion of normalcy at the Silver Pine shattered. The curtains were drawn, the thermostat said low, the room half lit by a dull lamp that hummed softly. 4 people lay perfectly still, 2 adults, 2 girls, arranged neatly, as if asleep. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no overturned furniture. Just the kind of stillness that doesn't belong to the living. When Detective Lauren Dyer arrived 20 minutes later, she didn't speak for a long time. She just stood by the doorway, notebook in hand, scanning the scene. The husband was identified as Richard Callan, age 59. Next to him, his wife Marissa, 57. On the second bed lay their daughters, Clara, 19, and Emily, 11. 4 bodies. 1 keycard. And not a single drop of blood visible. As the forensic team moved in, they noticed something subtle. Each victim appeared to have been carefully repositioned. Arms folded, faces turned slightly toward the ceiling. No visible bruises, no defensive wounds. But their skin told another story, a faint bluish hue along the lips and fingertips. It was the quiet signature of suffocation. To understand what happened inside room 1427, investigators had to step backward in time, into the kind of life that looks perfect until it isn't. Richard Callan was the type of man who wore pressed shirts even on weekends. He had spent decades building a small but respected law firm in Baltimore before switching careers. Friends described him as measured, careful, almost too calm. He didn't drink, didn't gossip, didn't raise his voice. A family man with a schedule for everything: Sunday breakfast at 9, bills at 10, calls to clients at 11. His wife, Marissa, had retired from teaching a few years earlier. She filled her days with gardening, baking, and volunteering at the local elementary school. People said she glowed when she talked about her daughters. Clara, the oldest, had just started college at St. Helena University, majoring in biology. Bright, disciplined, the kind who color codes her notebooks. And little Emily, 11 years old, loved to draw. She carried a small sketchbook everywhere she went, always adding color to quiet corners of the world. To the neighbors in Clearwater, the Callans were the kind of family you'd want living next door. But perfect pictures often have cracks hidden behind the frame. Around the start of that year, Richard had told a few colleagues that he was branching out into private finance. He began offering what he called bridge loans, short-term, high-interest funding for developers waiting on permits. It sounded impressive, even visionary. But in truth, it was risky. He was using borrowed money from friends and investors, money that wasn't entirely his to lend. When the market cooled, the repayments didn't come through. Then came the phone calls, polite at first, then impatient. Some checks bounced. Others were delayed. Richard's calm demeanor started to crack in small ways: missed lunches, short replies, a faraway look even when he was home. Marissa noticed, of course. She'd ask if everything was all right. He'd smile and say, just a rough patch. But rough patches don't usually end with a hotel room sealed by yellow tape. The day before the tragedy, on April 12th, the Callans checked into the Silver Pine Inn. They told the front desk they were visiting family in town. Witnesses remembered them being polite, even cheerful. The clerk, a college student working part-time, later said they looked like any family on a weekend getaway. Security footage showed them entering the elevator at 3:42 p.m., Richard holding a small duffel bag, Marissa carrying a purse, Emily holding a sketchbook. Clara wasn't with them yet. she was still on campus, finishing a biology review for her upcoming test. At 6:15 p.m., Richard made a call from the hotel phone. It lasted less than a minute. At 8:03, he swiped his card to leave the room and returned at 8:47 with 2 paper bags. The receipt later found inside one of them showed sandwiches, drinks, and 4 slices of cheesecake. Detective Dyer reviewed the CCTV footage frame by frame. Nothing unusual, no one else entered that room after 8:47. Which meant whatever happened between that night and the following morning. Autopsy results later confirmed the timeline. Marissa and Emily likely died first, sometime in the late evening. Clara arrived later, around 10 p.m., after leaving her dorm to meet her family, according to a text she sent her roommate. That text was never replied to. Investigators believe Clara was killed not long after she arrived. Richard's body was found last, with a deep cut across his wrist, and a hotel knife placed on the carpet beside him. No note. No explanation. Only silence. As the evidence piled up, the question that haunted everyone was why. Why would a man with a loving family, a comfortable home, and a steady career choose to end everything in such a deliberate way? The answer, detectives suspected, wasn't written in blood, it was written in numbers. 3 days after the scene was cleared, the FBI contacted local police. They had been quietly investigating Richard Callen for months. According to federal records, his bridge loan business had collapsed under nearly $12 million in unpaid debts. Investors had begun filing complaints. Lawsuits were pending. His accounts were frozen. It was the kind of financial implosion that doesn't just ruin a career, it ruins a name. To someone like Richard, reputation was everything. Losing it meant losing control. And for a man obsessed with control, there might have been only one way left to end the story, by closing it completely. In the days following the discovery, the news spread across Maryland. The Callen's house in Clearwater stood dark, mailbox overflowing, front yard flowers wilting in the sun. At St. Helena University, classmates lit candles outside Clara's dorm. At the local elementary school, Emily's teachers placed her last drawing, a picture of her family holding hands, on the classroom wall. Detective Dyer sat at her desk, flipping through the case file for the 10th time. Everything about the Callens screamed normal. But normal, she thought, was the easiest disguise. She looked at the final page of the hotel report, the one detail that never made the headlines. The Do Not Disturb sign on room 1427's door was hanging backward, facing inward. Someone had flipped it before locking the door from the inside. No one will ever know what went through Richard Callen's mind in those final hours, whether it was guilt, fear, or the crushing realization that the walls he built to protect his family were closing in on them instead. But the silence he left behind still lingers in Clearwater. And room 1427 remains booked, but never truly occupied. For weeks after the discovery at the Silver Pine Inn, Clearwater was caught between disbelief and quiet fear. Reporters swarmed the town, but most people didn't want to talk. The Callen family had seemed so normal, too normal. Behind drawn curtains, neighbors whispered about what could drive a man like Richard Callen to such a calm, calculated end. Detective Lauren Dyer didn't have an answer yet. What she had was a desk full of unanswered questions, a list of missing dollars, and a single photograph of a man who once looked completely in control. The deeper she went into Richard's past, the less sense his perfect image made. 10 years earlier, he'd been a small-town lawyer with a clean record, a tidy office, and a reputation for honesty. But sometime around 2005, he stopped taking local cases and began traveling to New York and Washington on business trips. There were no official contracts, no client names, only vague references in his planner: bridge deal, investor call, transfer due. When she traced his accounts, the numbers told a clearer story, one that ended in red. Richard had borrowed heavily to fund his so-called investment network. The money came from friends, former colleagues, even parents from the same private school Emily attended. He promised high short-term returns, the kind that sounded too good to be true. And like all things too good to be true, it was. By early spring, he was over $12 million in debt, juggling repayments with new loans just to keep appearances. Lauren found a file in his office labeled Client Retention. Inside were copies of personal checks, handwritten thank you notes, and a letter he never sent. The draft began with, "To those who trusted me," and ended abruptly with an ink blot and a torn corner. She sat there staring at it, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. It wasn't a confession. It was something worse, a prelude. Richard's email history filled in the blanks. On April 10th, 3 days before the family checked into the hotel, he received a final notice from his largest investor, demanding repayment within 72 hours or legal action. The same day, he transferred what remained of his savings into a single joint account. Then, quietly, he withdrew almost everything in cash. Lauren leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the map of Maryland pinned to her board. Red strings connected locations: his office, the family home, St. Helena University, and the Silver Pine Inn. What linked them wasn't geography, it was psychology. Every decision Richard made that week seemed rehearsed, deliberate. The booking, the timing, even the meals ordered from the hotel restaurant, it was all planned. She began to piece together the timeline not as a detective but as a storyteller reconstructing the last chapter of a man's life. Saturday evening, April 11th, Richard cancels a dinner with his neighbor, claiming family time. Sunday morning, he drives to Clara's campus, leaves flowers on her desk at the library, and tells her he'll see her later. That afternoon, he stops by a hardware store near Clearwater and buys rope and a utility knife, items he never used, both later found in the trunk of his car. Then, at 3:30 p.m., he checks in at the Silver Pine Inn with Marissa and Emily. Lauren stared at the timestamp on the receipt, 3:42 p.m., the same minute captured on CCTV. She replayed the video in her mind, the elevator doors closing, Richard's calm face reflecting the fluorescent light. He didn't look desperate. He looked resolved. Back at the station, she played the 911 recording again, the one made by the hotel manager. "We have a situation," his voice trembled. "There's a family, they're not moving." The silence that followed was heavier than words. The coroner's report added new dimensions to the horror. Marissa and Emily had no drugs in their system, no sign of struggle. They had simply stopped breathing. Clara's autopsy was the same. Only Richard showed physical trauma, a single deep cut, self-inflicted. The medical examiner concluded that suffocation was the cause of death for the others, likely using a soft object, something at hand, maybe a pillow or a blanket. The act itself was unthinkable, but the precision was chilling. Each event separated by hours, each staged to look peaceful. Lauren drove to Clearwater to meet Marissa's sister, Elaine Morrison. Elaine lived just 2 streets away from the Callens' old house, a neat red brick home with wind chimes on the porch. She greeted Lauren with a mug of coffee and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He loved them, Elaine said, over and over. Richard adored his girls. He wasn't violent. Lauren listened in silence. People always said that, he wasn't violent. But violence isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides in control, in fear, in the quiet need to preserve an image even as it crumbles. Did Marissa ever mention money problems? Lauren asked. Elaine hesitated. She said things were tight, but she thought it was temporary. She trusted him. They all did. When Lauren left, the afternoon light was fading. She parked across from the Callen home. The lawn was overgrown, the mailbox still full. Through the front window, she could see the faint outline of picture frames still hanging on the walls. One photo stood out, Richard and Marissa smiling, Clara and Emily between them, all dressed in white. A family portrait that looked more like a farewell than a memory. Back at headquarters, another piece of evidence came in, a voicemail retrieved from Richard's cell phone, timestamped the night before the deaths. It was short, no more than 30 seconds. His voice sounded steady, almost detached. "To whoever finds this," he said, "tell them I'm sorry. I wanted to fix it. I thought I could. But it's too late now." Then silence. The words haunted her. She played them again, slower this time, searching for hesitation or emotion. There was none. Only acceptance. The following morning, Lauren met with Special Agent Harris from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. He handed her a thin file. "We've been tracking him for 6 months," he said. "Ponzi-style operation. Small scale at first, then it snowballed. He moved everything through shell accounts, even mortgaged his own home twice." Lauren flipped through the pages, statements, forged signatures, false ledgers. "So he knew it was collapsing?" "Yes," Harris replied. "And when it did, he knew prison was next." That night, Lauren drove back to the Silver Pine Inn. Room 1427 was sealed, the hallway deserted. The hum of the vending machine filled the air. She stood at the door for a long time, imagining the last sounds heard inside: a child's laughter, a phone ringing unanswered, the rustle of bedsheets before silence returned. The keycard reader blinked faintly red, the same color as the line on Richard's wrist in the coroner's photo. She didn't open the door. She didn't need to. Everything about that room had already told her the truth. This wasn't an act of rage. It was an act of control. A man cornered by shame, unable to face exposure, choosing to end his story on his own terms, and taking with him the only people who still believed in him. As she left, a hotel employee cleaning nearby asked quietly, "Do you think he planned it?" Lauren paused. "He planned everything," she said. "Even the silence." Outside, the rain had started again, soft and relentless. The streetlights reflected off the puddles, turning the parking lot into a mirror. Lauren watched her own reflection ripple and fade with every drop. The case would soon be filed, the headlines would move on, but for her, it wasn't over. There were still voices missing, theirs. The ones that never got to tell their side of the story. Back in her car, she looked once more at the crime scene photo clipped to the dashboard. 4 figures, peaceful, arranged with impossible care. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "You didn't have to make it perfect, Richard." Then she started the engine and drove off into the dark. The investigation wouldn't bring anyone back, but it might bring something else: understanding. And sometimes, in the quiet echo of lives undone, that was the closest thing to justice. When the story of the Callan family finally slipped from the front pages, Clearwater went back to pretending nothing had happened. The street where they lived was trimmed again, the lawn service resumed, and a for sale sign went up in front of the house by midsummer. From the outside, everything looked fine. But to Detective Lauren Dyer, the case never really ended. It stayed with her like a sound you can't unhear, a quiet ringing that refused to fade. She often drove past the Silver Pine Inn on her way home from the precinct. The neon sign still flickered at night, and every time she saw it, she thought of the smell of disinfectant, the folded arms, the backward "Do Not Disturb" sign. Officially, the file was closed, a murder-suicide triggered by financial collapse. Unofficially, she couldn't shake the sense that there was still a missing piece. The more she reread the reports, the more she noticed tiny inconsistencies, details that didn't fit perfectly into the narrative everyone wanted to believe. The first was a simple timestamp. The hotel keycard data showed Richard's last entry to the room at 8:47 p.m., yet the front desk record logged a second key used nearly an hour later. The key matched the same card, but the motion sensors at the side exit had been triggered only minutes before. If Richard had returned, he must have gone outside, then back in. But why? Lauren requested the unfiltered security footage from the parking lot. For weeks, it had been sitting in the evidence archive, mislabeled. When the file opened on her computer, the footage showed rain-slick asphalt under a dim floodlight. At 9:42 p.m., a dark sedan pulled up to the far corner. The figure that stepped out wasn't clearly visible, blurred by distance, but it wasn't Richard. The build looked smaller, the movement quicker. The person stayed only a minute, walking toward the side entrance before vanishing out of frame. She paused the video, leaning closer. The timestamp matched the second keycard use. Her pulse ticked faster. Someone else had entered that room. Lauren replayed the scene again, frame by frame, until she caught a reflection in the car window, a faint outline of an umbrella with a white pattern. It was a small detail, but detectives lived on details. She checked the staff logs for that night. Only one employee had reported carrying an umbrella, the night clerk, Evan Rourke, a 24-year-old who joined the hotel 3 months prior. His statement from the original interview had been brief. He'd seen the family at check-in, no suspicious activity, no guests on that floor after 9 p.m. Lauren decided to visit him. Rourke's new job was at a car rental service outside Baltimore. When she arrived, he looked startled to see her badge. "It's been months," he said. "I thought that case was finished." "It is," Lauren replied, "but I need to confirm something about the night of April 12th. He hesitated. "That night was strange," he admitted. "I don't like to think about it." "Tell me anyway." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Around 9:30, I got a call from room 1427. It was short. Someone asked for fresh towels. A woman's voice. I thought it was Mrs. Callan. But when housekeeping went up, they said nobody answered the door. So I grabbed an extra set and went myself. When I knocked, the door opened just slightly, like it hadn't latched right. I pushed it," said housekeeping, "but nobody responded. Then someone, maybe Mr. Callan, spoke from inside and said, 'We're fine. Leave it there.' His tone was off. I just did what he asked." Lauren felt her chest tighten. "Why didn't you include that in your report?" "I did," he said quietly, "but my manager told me to take it out. Said the media didn't need extra confusion. He didn't want bad publicity. So I kept quiet." She stared at him for a moment, then thanked him and left. On the drive back, her mind replayed his words, a woman's voice. The official version said Marissa and Emily were already dead by then. Back at her desk, she reopened the autopsy reports. The medical examiner's notes mentioned time of death estimates within a 6-hour window, imprecise, based on body temperature and environment. What if the sequence wasn't what they thought? Lauren pulled up the call logs again. The hotel system automatically recorded internal phone connections. Room 1427's last outgoing call, at 6:15 p.m., went to the front desk. But there was another one, buried deeper, a 2-second connection to room 1431, unoccupied that night. A ghost call, as technicians called it, caused by faulty wiring. Still, it happened at 9:31 p.m., the same time Rourke claimed he received the towel request. Coincidence or signal? She didn't know. But it was enough to reopen the puzzle. In early August, she met with Dr. Elaine Morrow, a criminal psychologist who'd profiled similar family annihilation cases. They sat in a quiet diner, the kind that served burnt coffee and comfort food at all hours. Lauren slid her the file. He had no violent history, she said. No signs of abuse. Yet the scene was methodical. Too calm. Dr. Morrow skimmed the summary. Control and shame often overlap, she said. When a person builds their identity around stability, the loss of that identity can feel like annihilation. The act becomes a way to preserve the illusion of control. But you're saying something doesn't fit? Lauren nodded. The timeline. There's a call that shouldn't exist. The psychologist's expression darkened. Then maybe he didn't act alone. Or maybe he hesitated. Sometimes they don't go through with it right away. Sometimes they convince themselves there's still time to undo it. That idea stuck with her. What if, for a few hours that night, Richard tried to fix what couldn't be fixed? She returned to the Silver Pine one last time. The manager, an older man named Coleman, had grown tired of reporters. But when she mentioned the call logs, he sighed and led her upstairs. The 4th floor smelled faintly of bleach and air freshener. Room 1427's new lock blinked green as he opened it. The air felt colder than she remembered, the same patterned carpet stretching across the floor, the same pale wallpaper. Lauren stood by the window, watching the faint reflection of herself in the glass. For a moment, she imagined the Callans as they had been, Marissa folding clothes, Clara scrolling her phone, Emily coloring quietly on the carpet, and Richard watching them all with that still, unreadable gaze. Coleman broke the silence. We had to replace the mirror, he said. Maintenance found cracks forming inside the glass. Strange, right? Like pressure from behind. She turned to look. The new mirror gleamed under the ceiling light, its surface flawless. But she couldn't stop picturing the reflection that might have been there that night, for lives, frozen mid-motion, unaware of how close the end was. When she left the room, she slipped the keycard into her pocket. It wasn't procedure, but she didn't care. Some cases deserved to be carried, not closed. Outside, thunder rolled low across the sky. Rain began to fall again, tapping against the windshield as she drove away. Her recorder lay on the passenger seat. She pressed the red button and spoke softly, her own voice filling the car. Case file 09-1427. Official ruling stands, murder-suicide. Unofficial observation, timeline discrepancy remains unresolved. Possible outside contact post-mortem. Further evidence unlikely. She stopped, then added, but silence leaves echoes. And sometimes, those echoes tell the real story. She clicked the recorder off and looked up at the dark horizon. Somewhere out there, the truth about what happened in room 1427 had already faded into memory. But every time the rain came, she thought of the backward sign, the soundless air, and the faint smell of metal. The kind of silence that never really ends. By the time she reached the highway, the storm had turned the sky into a gray sheet. Headlights cut through the rain like small truths trying to find their way home. And as the wipers beat a steady rhythm, she whispered to herself the same words she'd written in the final line of her report: the perfect family was never perfect. It was just perfectly silent. She didn't know if anyone would ever reopen the case. But she knew she'd keep the keycard, a reminder that even in silence, there's always something left unsaid. It had been 6 months since Detective Lauren Dyer last stepped inside the Silver Pine Inn. The case file was officially archived, sealed under closed, confirmed murder-suicide. But the more time passed, the heavier that label felt. Closure was supposed to mean peace. Yet every time she opened her drawer, the glint of that hotel keycard reminded her that peace was just another illusion. The storm that night still lived in her memory, the smell of rain, the sound of her shoes against the carpeted hall, the stillness of room 1427. She thought she had let it go. But cases like this don't fade, they wait. They linger in the dark corners of a detective's mind until something, or someone, pulls the thread again. The pull came one morning in late November. Lauren was pouring her second cup of coffee when a call came through her desk line. Detective Dyer? This is Linda Rhodes, with the Clearwater County Coroner's Office. You might want to come by. When she arrived, Linda slid an evidence envelope across the table. Inside was a small flash drive, sealed and labeled with a hotel evidence code. We were reorganizing digital storage, Linda said. This was misfiled under a different case. Timestamps April 12th, the night of the Callens. Lauren inserted the drive into the laptop. The screen blinked, then opened to a folder containing a single file, room 1427_hallcam2.mp4. Her chest tightened. The footage was grainy but clear enough, the hallway outside room 1427, the same night. At 9:42 p.m., as before, a person entered the frame, wearing a dark coat and holding an umbrella patterned with pale stripes. But this time, as the figure turned, the face caught a glint of light. It wasn't Evan Rourke. It was Clara Callan. Lauren froze. Clara, the college student who was supposed to have died around 9:30 p.m., was alive on camera 12 minutes later. She appeared calm, even determined. In her hand, she carried a small paper bag. She knocked once, then used a keycard to open the door. After that, the hallway went still again. Lauren sat back, heart pounding. If the timestamps were right, then everything about the official timeline was wrong. The scene had been staged to look like it happened all at once. But Clara's presence changed everything. The next day, she reopened the case quietly, without notifying the press. She went back through the evidence from Clara's dorm room, things that hadn't mattered before. Old notebooks, a broken laptop, a drawer filled with receipts and train tickets. One slip of paper caught her eye, a withdrawal record from an ATM near the hotel, made at 8:57 p.m. The account was joint, tied to her father's business account. The amount withdrawn was $1,200, the exact cash missing from the recovered envelope in Richard's briefcase. That evening, Lauren drove to the university Clara had attended. The campus was quieter than she remembered, winter wind scraping across the empty courtyard. She met with Clara's roommate, Jenna Wallace, who had been hesitant to talk months earlier. "I told everything I knew," Jenna said at first. Lauren slid the still frame from the hotel footage across the table. "Then tell me why she went back." Jenna stared at it, her lips parting in disbelief. "That's impossible." Clara said her dad called that afternoon. He wanted to meet at the hotel, said he needed to explain something. She was nervous, but she went. Said she couldn't ignore him. Did she say why? She just said he'd been acting strange. Like he was hiding something. She told me, if anything feels off, I'll call. But she never did. Lauren nodded slowly. Did she mention anyone else? Yeah. Jenna hesitated. A man named Hale. Said he was one of her dad's investors. He'd been sending messages to her mom's phone before they left town. That name sent a jolt through Lauren. She remembered it from the financial records. Thomas Hale, one of the early investors in Richard's firm, who'd reported losing nearly $500,000. His last statement to the FBI claimed he'd confronted Richard a week before the deaths but received reassurances and silence. Lauren searched for Hale's address. He lived on the outskirts of D.C., in a townhouse with heavy blinds and an overgrown yard. When she knocked, no one answered. She left her card wedged in the door. That night, her phone rang at 11:17 p.m. "You shouldn't be digging this up," a male voice said. Calm. Controlled. "Who is this?" "You already know." Then the line went dead. The next morning, she filed an official note, unverified threat, probable link to Thomas Hale. Her captain told her to drop it. "Case has been closed 6 months. You want to ruin your record over a hunch?" But Lauren didn't stop. She drove back to the Silver Pine, pulled her coat tight against the December wind, and went inside one last time. Room 1427 had new wallpaper now, new furniture. The past had been painted over, but she could still feel it in the air, the static weight of truth left unfinished. She walked to the window, her reflection layered against the night outside. In the glass, the blurred shapes of rain looked almost like movement, fleeting, shifting. She took out the photo of Clara from the university yearbook. "What really happened to you?" she whispered. Her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "Stop looking at ghosts." Attached was a photo, the view from the hotel window, taken that very night. She turned sharply toward the curtains, but the street outside was empty. Only rain and headlights passing in the distance. Lauren drove straight to the nearest diner, somewhere public. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through the message again. No metadata, no traceable number. Whoever sent it knew where she'd been, and when. She called her colleague, Detective Singh, one of the few she trusted. "I think the Callan case wasn't what we thought. Clara might have come back willingly." Singh sighed. "You really think there's someone else still out there?" "I think there's someone who doesn't want this story finished." 2 days later, Singh forwarded her a report. Thomas Hale had been found dead in his home, an apparent suicide. A single note was recovered near his desk. It wasn't supposed to end that way. Lauren stared at the screen until the letters blurred. The official investigation ruled it unrelated. But Lauren knew better. Hale's phone records showed a final outgoing call to a number that traced back to the Silver Pine Inn's old landline, disconnected months ago. The circle had closed. On her way home that night, Lauren stopped by the old Callan house. The for sale sign was gone now, replaced by a sold banner. The windows were dark, except for one, the upstairs bedroom, where a single lamp glowed faintly through the curtains. She parked across the street and sat for a long moment, the rain tapping against the windshield. She thought of Richard, the proud lawyer who built his life on perfection. Of Marissa, who trusted too much. Of Emily, whose laughter still echoed in the background of old family videos. And Clara, who might have tried to save them, or failed to save herself. Maybe the truth was buried with them. Maybe it never would be clean or complete. But as Lauren watched the light in that window flicker once, then fade, she understood something the file could never capture: that silence wasn't the end of the story. It was just the part no one knew how to listen to. In her report that week, she wrote one last line under the case summary. The Callan case remains closed. But closure and truth are not the same thing. And the silence left behind still speaks louder than any confession. She signed it, locked the file, and turned off the light. Outside, the wind carried the faint hum of the highway, the sound of life moving on. But Lauren Dyer knew better. Some stories never end. They just wait, patient and quiet, in rooms we no longer dare to open. Winter had settled hard over Clearwater. The streets that once buzzed with the whispers of the Callan case were now quiet under a film of snow. People moved on, as they always do. New headlines had replaced the old ones, and the Silver Pine Inn had been sold, renovated, and rebranded with a new name, the Haven Suites. But to Detective Lauren Dyer, the name didn't matter. The past still lived there, buried behind paint and plaster, waiting for someone stubborn enough to listen. She hadn't returned since that night in the rain, when she'd stood in the parking lot staring up at the single glowing window. But the silence never let her go. The case had stopped being paperwork a long time ago. Now, it was personal, not because she needed to solve it, but because it refused to stay solved. It started again with a letter. No return address. Just her name, printed neatly on a cream envelope, and inside, a single sheet of paper. It read, "There were 5 that night. Not 4. You missed 1. No signature. No clue who sent it." But the paper smelled faintly of hotel detergent, the same scent she remembered from the Silver Pines hallways. Lauren took the letter straight to her desk, spreading out everything she still had from the Callan file: maps, photos, transcripts. 4 victims. 1 perpetrator. The math was perfect, until someone decided it wasn't. The next morning, she drove to the coroner's office. Linda Rhodes met her with tired eyes. "I told you, Lauren, we processed everybody in that room. 4 total. Nothing was missed." Lauren slid the note across the desk. "Then who wrote this?" Linda read it, her expression tightening. "Maybe a crank. These things get attention online. You know how people get." Lauren nodded, but her gut said otherwise. "Humor me." Recheck the intake forms from April 13th, 2009. Not just the Callans, everything logged that day. 2 hours later, Linda called her back. "There's something odd." A 5th tag number was assigned that morning, logged as unidentified male, room 1431. But that room was empty, wasn't it? Lauren's pulse quickened. Who signed the report? Linda hesitated. It's illegible. Could be Rourke. The hotel clerk? The name hit her like static. Evan Rourke. The same man who'd mentioned the towel call. The same man whose umbrella had appeared on that camera footage. That evening, Lauren went to his old apartment. The building manager said he'd moved out 2 months after the case closed. Left no forwarding address. He was quiet, the manager said. Polite. Paid in cash. But one thing, he always kept his blinds shut. Even in summer. Back at the precinct, Lauren dug through employment records and found his new workplace, a maintenance contractor based outside D.C. She called the number. No answer. So she drove. The office was dark except for one light in the back. The sign on the door read Silver Pine Property Services. Her breath caught. He'd named the company after the hotel. Inside, papers and tools were scattered across a desk. Folders labeled Hale and Paragon Bridge Loan Group lay open. Hale, the investor who died by suicide. She turned the pages carefully. The invoices were forged, the signatures copied from old contracts. Whoever had filed them knew the system inside out. A voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't be here." Lauren turned. Evan Rourke stood in the doorway, older now, his hair shorter, his eyes sunken. "You've been busy," she said quietly. He sighed, stepping closer. "You still don't understand, do you? He wasn't the only one involved." "Richard Callan?" Rourke nodded slowly. "He took the fall for something bigger. That bridge loan scam, it wasn't just him. There were investors, back channels, fake accounts. He tried to pull out. They wouldn't let him. So they killed him?" Rourke looked away. "No. He did that himself. But they made sure he had nowhere else to go." Lauren's hands tightened. "You were there that night. I brought him papers to sign. Hale's men wanted proof the debts were closed. When I got to the room, everything was quiet. Too quiet. He was sitting on the bed, the lights off, holding his daughter's hand. His voice cracked slightly. He said, 'It's over.' I left. 10 minutes later, I heard the call for housekeeping." Lauren stared at him, her mind a storm. "Why didn't you come forward?" Rourke's eyes hardened. "Because no one wanted the truth. Not the Bureau. Not the investors. They needed a villain, and they got one. You start digging now, you'll find nothing but ghosts." She reached into her coat and pulled out the letter. "Did you write this?" He looked at it for a long time, then shook his head. "No. But whoever did, they know what's buried." Before she could ask another question, he stepped back toward the door. "If you're smart, you'll stop here." She didn't. That night, Lauren traced the Paragon bridge files Rourke had mentioned. They led to an offshore shell company dissolved the same week as the Callan deaths. The last account activity showed a withdrawal, exactly $1,200. The same amount Clara had taken out that night. It wasn't coincidence. Clara hadn't been running away. She'd been trying to deliver evidence, maybe to Hale, maybe to Rourke. But she never made it out. The next morning, Lauren typed her findings into a confidential report. She didn't expect it to change anything. People at the top didn't like old cases reopening. But at least the truth, however fragmented, would exist somewhere. That afternoon, a brown envelope arrived at her desk. Inside was a flash drive and a note, "Now you know why." The drive contained a video, an old security feed, timestamped 10:14 p.m., April 12, 2009. The same night. It showed room 1427 from a hidden camera above the TV, likely installed for security. Lauren pressed play. Richard sat on the bed, staring at the floor. Clara stood near the desk, holding the paper bag. Marissa was by the window, whispering to Emily. The atmosphere was heavy but not violent, not yet. Clara stepped forward, saying something inaudible. Richard shook his head. She handed him the bag. He opened it and froze. Then the picture cut to static. Lauren leaned back, her throat dry. The video was incomplete, maybe corrupted, maybe edited. But in that single moment before it ended, she saw something new in Richard's eyes, not rage, not despair, but recognition. He had realized something, and whatever it was, it had sealed all their fates. She shut the laptop and sat in silence. The hum of the precinct faded, replaced by the echo of rain against glass, the same rhythm she'd heard outside the hotel years ago. Later that night, she filed her final entry. Case remains unresolved. Evidence suggests external coercion linked to financial fraud network. Final motive unknown. Family deaths no longer consistent with isolated act. Reclassification recommended. Then she paused and typed one more line. Sometimes the truth doesn't die with the dead. It just waits for someone stubborn enough to listen. Lauren closed the file, switched off her light, and looked out through the station window. Snow was falling, slow, quiet, endless. Somewhere in the distance, the old Silver Pine sign flickered one last time before going dark forever. For the first time in years, she let herself breathe. The story wasn't over, but it didn't need to be. Some endings aren't about answers. They're about finally knowing where to stop looking. And in that stillness, beneath the falling snow, the silence finally felt like peace. The first snow of February came quietly, almost unnoticed, covering Clearwater in a thin white hush. To most people, it was just another cold morning. But for Detective Lauren Dyer, it marked 6 years since the Callan case, 6 years since the night she stood in the parking lot of the Silver Pine Inn, staring up at the window of room 1427. She'd been promoted since then, now captain of investigations, her office cleaner and her desk heavier. But even now, some nights when the station was empty and the world outside was still, she'd hear the echo of that room in her mind. The silence hadn't gone away, it had simply changed shape. Her phone buzzed around 6:30 a.m. It was a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something in her gut told her not to. "Detective Dyer," a woman's voice asked. It was calm, deliberate. "You don't know me, but you knew my father. His name was Thomas Hale." Lauren straightened. "The investor?" "Yes. He died in 2009. Or that's what the report said." Lauren's pulse slowed, the way it always did when the past started knocking again. "What exactly are you telling me?" "I found something," the woman continued. "It's about the Callans. About that night. I think my father left a file for you." An address followed, a cabin near the Chesapeake Bay, 2 hours from Clearwater. She didn't ask how the woman had her number. She didn't ask why now. By sunrise, she was already driving north, the snow falling heavier by the mile. The cabin was small, tucked between leafless trees overlooking the frozen bay. It looked abandoned, except for the faint curl of smoke rising from the chimney. A young woman opened the door before Lauren could knock. Mid-20s, sharp eyes, a cautious expression. "You came." Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of old paper and cedar. A wood stove glowed in the corner. On the table sat a box of documents, yellowed at the edges, and a cassette recorder. "My name's Eliza Hale," the woman said. "After my father died, I packed away everything from his office. I didn't open this box until last month." Lauren steadied the papers. Some bore the Paragon Bridge logo. Others were personal letters between Hale and Richard Callan. Most were signed simply R. Eliza pressed play on the recorder. A man's voice crackled through the static, unmistakably Thomas Hale's. "If anyone's hearing this, it means they've found me or I've run out of time." Callan wasn't the monster the papers made him out to be. He was trying to stop it, the transfers, the shell accounts, the offshore deals. "I told him to walk away, but he said he couldn't. Said they had something on him, something he couldn't fight. He was right. They had all of us." The tape clicked off. Lauren sat back, her thoughts racing. "Do you know what he meant by they?" Eliza hesitated. "He never said. But I found a name in one of the letters." She slid a paper across the table. In faint ink, at the bottom of a typed note, was a signature, M. Rourke. Lauren's stomach tightened. "Evan Rourke." Eliza nodded. "He used a different first name sometimes, Matthew. Apparently he was managing more than hotel maintenance." Lauren stood slowly, staring out the frost-covered window. "Where is he now?" "I don't know," Eliza said. "But if my father's note is right, he's still in Maryland. Still working. Maybe under another name." Lauren's phone buzzed again, a message from her old colleague, Detective Singh. "You're not going to believe this, Silver Pine and demolition delayed. Contractor flagged hazardous material in the foundation. You might want to see this." She drove straight there. The Silver Pine Inn looked smaller than she remembered, fenced off and half dismantled. Its new name, the Haven Suites, had already been torn down from the marquee. Snow covered the debris like a shroud. Workers in reflective vests stood around a half-open pit near the north wing. One of them waved her over. "You Dyer? The county told us to call if we found anything unusual." She followed him to the edge of the pit. A section of the old concrete foundation had cracked open, revealing a rusted metal container wedged inside. It was the size of a small safe. Lauren knelt, brushing away snow with her gloved hand. The lid was half-eaten by rust but still locked. "Get me a crowbar," she said quietly. When it opened, the smell of damp paper filled the air. Inside were old hotel documents, guest logs, and a single sealed folder labeled 1427, security records. Her breath caught. The folder was dated April 2009, a week after the murders. But the hotel had supposedly turned everything over already. She flipped it open. Inside were maintenance logs signed by Rourke, listing unauthorized keycard duplications and electronic override tests. One note, dated 2 days before the deaths, read, "Night access granted per M, Hale, pending authorization." Lauren's heart pounded. Hale. Rourke. Both tied to that room. And Clara, the daughter who had walked back in that night, had likely brought something with her. Evidence? Money? A document? Something worth killing for. She looked closer at the last page. In faded handwriting, it read, "If found, return to L. Dyer, Clearwater PD." Her name. Written 6 years before she ever touched the case. The air seemed to thin around her. "Detective," one of the workers asked. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah. Just colder than I thought." That night, she returned to her office, the folder resting on her desk like a ghost. She read every line until her eyes burned. The truth was there, scattered between numbers and initials, proof that the Callan tragedy hadn't been random or self-contained. It had been engineered. The pattern was clear now, a financial cover-up that went beyond the family, beyond the hotel, maybe even beyond Hale. Every piece of paper pointed to a network of people who'd used the Callans as collateral damage, a warning to anyone trying to expose them. But there was one last note, written in Clara's handwriting on the back of a receipt tucked inside the file. "If something happens to us, don't blame him." He tried to stop it. Lauren sat back in her chair, the snow outside reflecting pale light across the floor. The story wasn't clean. It never would be. Richard hadn't been a hero, but he hadn't been a monster either. He was a man trapped between guilt and fear, trying to protect his family from something far worse. She recorded one final voice memo before locking the evidence away. Case File 1427, Addendum. Recovered documents confirm prior tampering and third-party interference. Probable cause of external coercion. The Callan case cannot be seen as a closed domestic event. It was systemic. Patterned. Maybe deliberate. The truth isn't buried in that room, it's buried in the people who built it. She stopped the recording, her hand trembling slightly. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, endless, erasing footprints as fast as they were made. She stood at the window for a long time, watching the lights of Clearwater shimmer through the white haze. The city was quiet again, pretending to forget. But somewhere out there, someone had written her name on a file long before she'd ever opened it. And that meant one thing, someone had been waiting for her all along. She whispered to herself, maybe the silence isn't over. Maybe it just changed voices. Then she turned off the light, leaving the file on the desk, still open, pages fluttering in the draft from the window. The snow outside swallowed every sound. Only the soft click of the door echoed in the dark. And for a moment, it was impossible to tell if it was an ending or the beginning of something new. It had been nearly a year since the last snowfall that covered Clearwater. The Callan case was history now, archived, boxed, and forgotten. The silver pine was gone, reduced to nothing but a gravel lot fenced in by weeds and half-buried no trespassing signs. For most people, it was a closed story. But for Detective Lauren Dyer, the silence it left behind was still speaking, softly, persistently, in ways she couldn't ignore. The department had changed. A new chief, new faces, new priorities. Cold cases were being digitized and transferred to a regional archive. The Callan file, labeled 1427, was set to be shipped out by the end of the month. Lauren thought she was ready to let it go. Then, 3 nights before the transfer, something unexpected arrived. It came by courier, no sender listed, just a padded envelope addressed to her office. Inside was a USB drive, plain black, no markings. She plugged it into her computer out of instinct. Curiosity always had a way of betraying her. A single folder opened, the Callan Project. Inside were 3 files. 2 were audio recordings. The third was a scanned letter. She played the first recording. If you're hearing this, you already know the truth they wanted buried. But what you don't know is who started it. The voice was deep, strained, male, older, measured. Not Richard Callan. Not Thomas Hale. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what they built and what it cost. Static cut the rest. The timestamp read February 12, 2023, just 2 weeks earlier. Lauren sat back, heart beating slow and deliberate. Whoever this was, they weren't talking about the murders anymore. They were talking about what led to them. She opened the second file. It was shorter, 10 seconds of muffled audio, followed by a metallic click, like a key turning in a lock. Then silence. Finally, she opened the letter. The text was typed on an old manual typewriter, faintly misaligned. There's another file. It was never logged, never copied. The last missing piece of room 1427. You'll find it where the snow never melts. No signature. Lauren read it again and again until the words blurred. Where the snow never melts. It wasn't poetic, it was a direction. Somewhere cold, constant. Then it hit her. The evidence freezer. She went down to the basement storage that night, long after the others had gone home. The room was silent except for the hum of the refrigeration units. Each locker was marked with case numbers. When she reached 1427, her breath clouded in the cold air. Inside was a stack of sealed evidence bags, items from the hotel, photographs, paper files. But tucked behind them was a smaller, untagged envelope, old enough that the paper had started to yellow. She tore it open carefully. Inside was a single cassette tape, labeled only with the initials Amir. Her pulse quickened. Matthew Rourke. Back upstairs, she dug out an old player and pressed play. At first, nothing. Then a faint click, followed by Rourke's voice, younger, but unmistakable. They told me it would be clean. That nobody would get hurt. I should have known better. Callan was supposed to sign, take the money, walk away. But he found out what the accounts were funding. He said he'd go public. They panicked. Lauren froze, her pen hovering over her notepad. Hale tried to stop them. He thought they'd listen to him. He was wrong. The meeting that night, it wasn't random. They were supposed to retrieve the documents from Clara, but she came early. By the time I got there, it was already too late. There was a pause, a shaky breath. I cleaned the room. They said it was to protect the company, but I knew it was to bury the story. The rest, they staged. The police saw what they were told to see. I told myself I'd stay quiet. But silence has its own kind of punishment. The tape stopped. Lauren sat motionless, the words replaying in her head. The murders hadn't just been an act of desperation, they had been a cleanup, a silencing of everyone who knew too much. Richard hadn't killed his family in a fit of madness. He had tried to protect them from being erased entirely. She leaned back, eyes tracing the shadows of her office ceiling. Rourke had confessed, but where was he now? If he'd recorded this, he was either hiding or dead. The next morning, she called her old contact at the FBI's white-collar division. Check the name Matthew Rourke, she said. Any recent activity, aliases, travel records. The agent hesitated. That's funny, he said. We had a Rourke in custody 2 years ago. Died during transfer. But here's the weird part, no fingerprint match. File says the prints belong to someone named Marcus Wren. Sound familiar? Her chest tightened. Imar again. The same initials on the tape. She drove out to the federal storage facility that afternoon. The clerk at the desk looked confused when she mentioned the name. "Ma'am, that file's restricted." But he hesitated, lowering his voice. "I can tell you this much, the transfer wasn't local. The detainee was being moved from a private holding site near Chesapeake to an unlisted federal center. The van never arrived." "Van disappeared?" she asked. He nodded. 6 miles of road between checkpoints. Gone. Lauren left the building, her thoughts churning. If Rourke had vanished, or someone wanted him to, it meant the network he'd talked about still existed. The Callan case wasn't the last chapter. It was the first. That night, she played the tape again, this time listening to the background noise, faint hums, clicks, the rhythm of air conditioning, and something else, a repeating tone, soft and mechanical. She isolated the sound on her computer and ran a filter. It wasn't random. It was Morse code. 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots. SOS. Her breath caught. She rewound the tape, catching another faint string near the end, D6, Harbor Point. Coordinates? A location? By dawn, she was already driving south, the highway cutting through fog and frost. She stopped near the industrial pier district where the city met the bay. The warehouses there were mostly abandoned, their windows boarded, their signs faded. But one building, painted gray-blue and half-collapsed, still bore a rusted nameplate, Harbor Point Cold Storage, D6 Facility. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Her flashlight beams sliced through the darkness, catching remnants of old crates and shattered shelving. Then she saw it, a metal locker against the far wall, half open, covered in frost. Inside was a black briefcase. Lauren lifted it onto a crate and opened it slowly. Documents filled the interior, ledgers, contracts, offshore account details, all signed by Paragon Bridge Loan Group and countersigned by government subcontractors. The conspiracy was bigger than anyone had imagined. At the very bottom of the stack was a photo, the Callan family, smiling on a beach, their clothes windblown, carefree. Written on the back were 2 words, "For her." Lauren stood there for a long time, the cold biting her skin. She didn't know who her was, Marissa, Clara, or maybe even herself. But she understood the message. The truth wasn't gone. It had just been waiting for someone to carry it forward. She packed the documents, locked the briefcase, and walked back into the snow. That night, in her office, she added one final entry to the Callan file. Recovered new evidence linking the Callan case to broader financial and political fraud operations. Case no longer classified as domestic homicide. Recommend reclassification under federal jurisdiction. Status, active. She paused, then added one more line. The silence isn't over. It's just louder now. Then she closed the file, switched off the recorder, and looked out into the night, the snow still falling, slow and endless, erasing footprints once again. And for the first time, she didn't feel haunted. She felt ready. Because some ghosts don't ask to be forgotten. They ask to be found. The Chesapeake winter had started to thaw. The snowbanks that once framed the streets of Clearwater had turned into slick rivers of melted frost, leaving the town gray and silent again. Most people had already forgotten the Callan case, or at least learned to stop saying the name. But Detective Lauren Dyer hadn't. She had spent the last week cross-referencing everything found in that black briefcase, offshore accounts, false identities, the ledgers signed by Paragon Bridge Loan Group. Each document led to another thread, another shadow. The deeper she went, the more it became clear that this wasn't just about a family's tragedy or one man's breakdown. It was about an entire system built to hide its crimes under polite smiles and corporate signatures. Her office was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the faint crackle of the old tape recorder she'd started using again. She pressed record, leaned back in her chair, and began dictating. Case file update. The evidence found at Harbor Point confirms large-scale financial laundering linked to federal contracts. The name Paragon appears repeatedly. Possible shell entities include Clearwater Holdings, D6 Maritime, and North Axis Energy. If the Callens discovered this, it explains everything. She stopped. There was something about the name North Axis Energy that scratched at her memory. She opened her laptop and began to dig through public filings. A few minutes later, she froze. The company had a registered office only 40 miles away, on the outskirts of Hawthorne Bay, a small, decaying port town long abandoned after its shipyards closed. Lauren exhaled slowly. "Of course," she murmured. "The place where the ice never melts." She left a note on her desk for her captain, gone to follow up on Paragon. Back by midnight. She grabbed her coat and the briefcase and headed out. The road to Hawthorne Bay was empty, lined with skeletal trees and fading signs. Her car's headlights cut through the fog like twin knives. Every few miles, she replayed the last part of Rourke's tape in her head, the meeting that night. They were supposed to retrieve the documents. By the time I got there, it was already too late. What documents? And why were the Callens even involved? By the time she reached the outskirts of the bay, the fog had thickened. She parked near the remnants of an old dockyard, crumbling concrete, rusted cranes, and a long warehouse with boarded-up windows. The sign above the gate read North Axis Storage Facility 14, the letters barely visible beneath years of salt and decay. She stepped inside, flashlight in one hand, her gun holstered at her side. The air smelled of metal, damp wood, and something else, paper, maybe, or time. Rows of crates stretched into the dark, marked with years and codes. The floor was slick with melting frost. As she moved deeper, the sound of dripping water echoed in the silence. Her light caught a series of footprints, fresh, leading toward the back of the building. Lauren's voice was steady, almost too calm when she spoke into her recorder again. Following signs of recent activity. Possible trespasser or remaining operative. Proceeding cautiously. The trail led her to a narrow door sealed with a broken padlock. Behind it, a small office sat untouched, a desk, a rotary phone, a calendar still open to 2015. On the desk was a single folder, brittle from the cold. It was labeled Project Elysium. She flipped it open. Inside were photographs, satellite images, blueprints, financial transfers, all pointing to an offshore drilling operation under North Axis Energy. But the coordinates weren't in U.S. waters. They were off the coast of Greenland. Lauren's pulse quickened. This wasn't just about embezzlement. This was about something global, something buried under literal ice. She scanned the room again and saw something else, a small voice recorder, identical to the one she carried. It was still on. She pressed play. If you've come this far, you already know the walls are thinner than they seem. Paragon was never just a bridge loan group. It was a funding shell, an entire financial labyrinth to move money for defense contracts. The Callens were never random victims. They were the whistleblowers. The voice paused, then continued, quieter this time. They reached out to a contact inside the Justice Department. The meeting was scheduled for the night they died. When Paragon found out, they sent cleanup. Rourke tried to intervene, but it was too late. You're standing where he buried what he couldn't destroy. Lauren turned around slowly, scanning the floor. The voice on the tape had changed. It wasn't Rourke. It was female. Older. Familiar. Lauren, if you're hearing this, you're closer than anyone ever got. But you need to understand, the people behind this don't vanish. They adapt. They're already watching again. Her heart froze. She knew that voice. It was Chief Evelyn Ross, her former mentor, the same woman who'd retired right after the Callen case was closed. The recorder clicked off. Lauren stood there, the sound of dripping water the only thing left. For a long time, she didn't move. Her mentor had been part of it, or at least close enough to know. That changed everything. She looked down. Beneath the desk, part of the wooden floor was uneven. She knelt and pried at it with her knife until a loose panel gave way. Inside was a sealed waterproof case. She pulled it out, heart pounding, and set it on the desk. Inside were several old hard drives, labeled with dates and initials, Emir, RC, YAR. The same initials she'd seen on every trail since day one. Lauren whispered, almost to herself, Matthew Rourke. Richard Callan. Evelyn Ross. Her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her. It was a message from an unknown number. Stop digging, Lauren. Some ghosts are better left frozen. Her flashlight flickered. The wind howled outside the warehouse, shaking the metal beams. For a moment, she thought she heard footsteps behind her, light, cautious, deliberate. She turned fast, flashlight slicing through the dark, but there was nothing. She exhaled, trying to steady her breath. The old tape still sat in the player, the last word repeating faintly through static, watching, watching. Lauren packed the drives into her bag and left, locking the door behind her. As she walked back to her car, she looked out at the black water of the bay. The ice that once covered it was breaking apart in slow, drifting sheets. Beneath the surface, the water looked bottomless. In her mind, everything lined up now: the briefcase, the offshore accounts, the fake death records, the missing van, even the Callan tragedy. It was all part of one machine designed to bury inconvenient truths. And now that she'd pulled one thread, the rest of the fabric was beginning to tear. Back in her car, she pressed record again. New development. Evidence suggests Chief Ross may have been connected to Paragon. Rourke and Ross likely worked together on Project Elysium. Unknown scope. The Callans were attempting exposure. Their deaths were containment. She stopped for a moment, her eyes on the dark water ahead. If I disappear, it won't be an accident. She clicked off the recorder. The night outside was still, but somehow she felt the air move, a whisper through the trees, or maybe the echo of a memory refusing to die. The headlights cut through the fog as she drove away from the bay. In her rearview mirror, the faintest light glimmered across the surface of the water, a shimmer beneath the ice, as if something alive was stirring below. Lauren didn't look back. She knew now that the story didn't end with the Callans. It didn't even end with Paragon. It went deeper, into the frozen places where no one ever looked, where silence wasn't absence but design. And as her car disappeared into the night, her last words on tape lingered like a promise. The truth doesn't melt. It just waits for the thaw. The night over Hawthorne Bay felt endless. Clouds hung low and heavy, swallowing the moon, leaving only the thin beam of Lauren Dyer's headlights to cut through the fog. The tape recorder on the passenger seat clicked softly with each bump of the road. She'd been replaying it for hours, the final words of Chief Evelyn Ross. They're already watching again. The words echoed in her head long after the tape stopped. Lauren had always trusted Evelyn. She'd been her mentor, her guide through every ugly corner of the job. To learn that Evelyn might have been part of the Paragon operation, or at least protecting it, felt like betrayal. But something didn't add up. Evelyn's voice didn't sound defensive. It sounded tired. Like someone warning her from inside the same trap. The wipers squeaked across the windshield, pushing away light flakes of snow. She was heading north now, toward a facility marked on the Elysium documents, Station 47, a defunct communications relay once used by North Axis Energy. Officially abandoned. Unofficially, it was the last known location linked to Paragon's offshore transmissions. She parked the car a few hundred yards away, killed the engine, and stepped out. The wind bit through her coat, carrying the smell of salt and cold iron. Ahead, the silhouette of the facility rose from the mist, concrete, steel, and silence. The sign on the gate was almost illegible: authorized personnel only, property of Paragon Systems. Lauren clicked her flashlight on and began to walk. The building's interior was gutted. Rows of empty server racks stood like skeletons. The air was thick with dust. But deeper inside, she found a corridor still humming faintly with power. A low, rhythmic buzz echoed from behind a locked steel door labeled Control Room A. She pulled a crowbar from her bag and forced the door open. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply, her breath turned to fog. Rows of inactive monitors lined the walls, and in the center of the room, a single terminal screen flickered with green text. Reconnecting. Signal lost, Project Elysium Node 3. Lauren's pulse jumped. She stepped closer, brushing dust from the keyboard, and typed, "Access logs." The screen flickered again, lines of data scrolled upward, most of it corrupted. But one entry was still readable. March 9, 2023, secure uplink initiated by E. Ross. Her throat went dry. Evelyn had been here. She scrolled further. The next line stopped her cold. Transmission recipient, Dyer, L. Her name. The terminal beeped once, then froze. A mechanical click echoed from somewhere in the wall. Slowly, a section of the concrete paneling slid open, revealing a small hidden compartment. Inside was a sealed metallic cylinder, no larger than a thermos, wrapped in frost and stamped with a faded logo, Paragon Systems Confidential. She lifted it carefully onto the table. A biometric scanner was embedded into the cap. "Evelyn," she whispered. Lauren placed her thumb on the pad. Nothing happened. She hesitated, then took out her multi-tool and carefully pried at the base. After a few seconds, it clicked open with a soft hiss. Inside was a small drive module and a folded piece of paper. She unfolded the note. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. "If you found this, it means I didn't make it out. What's on this drive is everything they built, the money, the connections, the names. But more than that, it's proof they were never just laundering. Paragon wasn't funding business. It was funding surveillance." Lauren's pulse raced as she read. They built a system under Elysium, data streams hidden in financial code. Every transaction, every account, carried signals disguised as numeric sequences. The Callans found it by accident. They were never meant to. You weren't either. Her breath caught as she reached the last line. "You can end it, Lauren. But once you open the file, you'll never be invisible again." A faint hum rose from the terminal. The lights flickered. Somewhere above, a generator kicked to life. Lauren backed away instinctively, scanning the corners of the room. The door she'd entered through was still cracked open, but now, faint footsteps echoed in the hallway. Someone else was here. She turned off her flashlight and crouched behind the terminal. The footsteps drew closer, slow, measured, stopping just outside the door. Through the gap, she saw a figure, tall, wearing a dark coat, a small earpiece glinting beneath the light. The person paused, then moved toward the central monitors. Lauren held her breath. The intruder spoke quietly into a mic. "The package has been accessed. Confirming user profile. Dyer." Her name again. They knew she was here. Without thinking, she grabbed the drive module, stuffed it into her pocket, and slipped toward the secondary exit on the far side of the control room. The metal door creaked softly. She froze, then pushed through and started running. The hallway stretched long and dim, cables hanging like vines from the ceiling. Behind her, she heard the intruder shout, "She's got it." Gunfire echoed, not close, but enough to make her sprint harder. She burst through a service door into the open air. The snow had picked up again, falling heavy and fast. Her car was 200 yards away. She bolted across the lot, boots crunching on frozen gravel. The facility lights flickered behind her like lightning. She could hear the distant roar of an engine, another vehicle starting up. She didn't look back. Inside the car, she threw the briefcase onto the passenger seat and turned the key. The engine sputtered, then caught. Headlights flared to life. She floored the accelerator. In the mirror, the fog behind her glowed faintly red, tail lights following. Whoever they weren't letting her go. Lauren took the coastal road, the one that curved along the cliffs above the bay. The snow blurred everything into a silver haze. Her tires skidded once, caught again, and kept going. She could still hear Evelyn's voice in her head, "You can end it, but you'll never be invisible again." Her phone buzzed, a single notification on the screen, signal detected, upload pending. The drive. It was transmitting automatically. She slowed slightly, glancing at the GPS. The map showed an uplink station 2 miles ahead, a decommissioned Coast Guard relay. If she could reach it, she could send the data to federal servers before they caught her. The following car was closing in. Its headlights flared brighter, cutting through the snow. Lauren swerved off the main road, tires spitting gravel, and barreled down the side path toward the relay tower. The structure rose through the fog like a ghost, tall, skeletal, rimed with ice. She pulled up beside the entrance, slammed the car door, and ran. Inside, the tower still had power. Old emergency lights glowed faintly along the stairs. She climbed fast, clutching the drive in her hand. At the top, she found a small console still linked to the network. She plugged in the module. The system blinked to life. A progress bar appeared. Uploading. 12%. 27%. 41%. Below her, a door slammed open. Footsteps. She stared at the screen, her breath loud in her ears. 58%. 70%. 81%. The footsteps reached the final landing. Lauren turned, pistol raised. Through the swirling snow in the open hatch, a shadow appeared, the same tall figure from before. He stopped. They locked eyes. "Lauren," he said quietly, "you have no idea what's in that file." "I don't need to," she replied. "I just need everyone else to see it." He took one step forward. 93%. 97%. 100%. The terminal beeped once. Transmission complete. Lauren exhaled. For the first time in months, her hands didn't shake. She pulled the drive out, tucked it back into her coat, and turned to face him fully. "You can shut down the servers," she said, "but it's already out there." He stared at her for a long moment, then lowered his weapon. The wind howled through the open hatch, scattering snowflakes across the steel floor. "Then you'd better run," he said. Lauren nodded once and stepped backward into the snow. The fog swallowed her as she disappeared down the tower steps. By dawn, she was gone. The file, the Callan evidence, was already making its way through encrypted networks and anonymous newsrooms across the country. Within hours, headlines would break, "Whistleblower data exposes Paragon scandal." And somewhere in the static hum of the transmission logs, one final entry appeared and signed, "Untraceable." Truth delivered. Silence broken. Lauren Dyer's name was never mentioned in the reports. But among those who knew the case, who remembered the Callans, and the quiet tragedy that started it all, her story became something else entirely. A whisper beneath the ice. A signal that never stopped transmitting.